Tara, is there any sort of pre-cap we need, or are we good to go?
I'm just going to, just on behalf of everybody from Sandpiper Ventures, just wanted to say hello. And I know that Eleanor, you know most people on this call.
I
I do
do.
have your bio here.
Yeah.
Just I think everybody knows about Sapphire Media and that your coaching prowess, and you've influenced the life and careers of so many entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs. And so we're excited to have you here. This is part of our masterclass series, so just great to have your insights. And we will record this session and post it to our YouTube channel. So I won't delay Eleanor anymore. It's a real treat to have you here. A person who's very much in demand for her expertise. So thank you, and thank you all for joining us. And I'll hand it over to Eleanor. And I hope Natalie's getting connected okay. I just see sort of connected to audio.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So here's my plan for the session. I want to really give you guys some very, very practical stuff around what I consider to be true about building a leadership brand in 2023. What I've noticed is that a lot of what I see sometimes when people talk about building a leadership brand or building a strong personal brand, it's like, 2008 is calling. They want their personal branding tips back. So they can sometimes feel quite outdated, and a lot of times more about creating this veneer of perfectionism and this veneer of professionalism versus actually, really positioning you as authentic, as a fully embodied expression of who you are, and fully in your power. Right. And so I think that's really what I want to share with you today. Some things that I have learned along the way, deconstructed into a super, super simple diagram that I hand drew for you. So I'm going to share it. We'll talk through it. And then we can open it up for any questions. Agree with me, disagree with me, challenge it. The key, I think, is that you walk out of here with a couple of really practical strategies that you can leverage right away to help you, to help your reputation precede you in all of the best ways. I think about these access rooms, and I'm about to share a story which I think really illustrates this, but power and influence generally congregate in really small rooms. And a lot of times it's like, who gets into those rooms? And when you get into those rooms, do you feel confident in yourself? And are you prepared to show up, not perfectly, but are you prepared to show up true to you, true to your message, and true to where you're going? So that's really what we're trying to sort of equip you with here. There's a great story from a woman named Madeleine Albright, who was sort of a really, really well-respected political figure in US politics. And she had just been appointed to be the United States' ambassador to the United Nations. So this was a plum role for Madeleine. And she talked about going to her first sort of General Assembly. And she said that, as always, the places where all of the real deals and the real conversations and the real brokering happened were in these really small rooms. It wasn't in the big room that we see on TV, on the news, where people are talking and they're all wearing earphones. They're in small rooms. And so her strategy as she went into this meeting was, look, I'm just going to kind of sit down, be quiet, and observe. I'm going to get a lay of the land and observe and really help myself understand and get it sort of situated. And then maybe I'll say something. And she walks into the little room, and she said that around those tables, it wasn't your name. So where she was supposed to sit, it didn't say Madeleine Albright, it said United States. And she realized that if she didn't speak, if she followed the strategy that she'd had going in, then the voice of the United States would be silent at that meeting. And so she had to quickly, really embrace a new version of herself, a version of herself that spoke first. So I love this story because I think the core message here is that sometimes a lack of swagger has huge implications, not only for you, but also for the team you represent, for the mission that you represent, for the organization you represent, and for what's possible for you in the future. And in fact, just the other day, I did this interview for my podcast, Anchored Intelligence, with this fantastic entrepreneur who was actually recommended to me by one of Sandpiper's co-founders, Nicole LeBlanc. And so her name was Caitlin McGregor. I'm not sure if you guys know her. Really successful founder. She runs this big talent management sort of platform that basically leverages the power of psychometric assessments at scale. And the interview has yet to come out, but I was asking her, what do you think has been the single most important thing for you in scaling this company? And she is like a hardcore operator, and has very strong operational background. And she said, I wanted to come in and just build this really great operationally sound company, and I did that, but none of it worked until I really knew how to sell my offer. And a big part of that was really being willing to step into a high state of swagger, like a high state of deep confidence in my offering, in my product, and what we offered, that it was excellent, that it could compete. And I think that is like a lot of times when we think about building a leadership brand, my concern sometimes is how people talk about it. And I sort of hinted at this off the top of the call, is that it's like from 2008. It feels like and I was like totally, present in the working force, as many of you guys here were as well in 2008. But a lot of times when I think about leadership brand, that term can sometimes feel a little bit tepid, especially for an entrepreneur who is building a business, whose biggest enemy often is that she's not known in those rooms. You know what I mean? Or maybe she's known for what she was before and not for what she's bringing today. That I actually think it's really powerful to, when we think about building a leadership brand, to channel a little bit of swagger. It never hurt anybody. A lack of it definitely did. And so that's really what we'll talk about today. What are the three components of really building leadership presence, a leadership brand, AKA swagger? So there's three things that I'm going to share with you guys. Just give me a sec. I'm going to share my screen here. So brace yourselves, because this is the kind of drawing. When you see this, I want you guys to think about that story about Picasso, when a woman asked him to, draw a picture, and he wanted to charge her a bunch of money. I guess he drew it on a napkin. She's like, it took you 5 minutes. And he's like, no, it took me 30 years to know how to draw this picture in 5 minutes. So let's think about this when we look at this. This isn't quite as hastily drawn, but let's look at the three components of building a strong leadership brand: vision, visibility, and consistency. I'm going to break down each of them here. We'll talk through what they are very specifically, and I'll talk through how you do it. So the first is vision. And when you think about vision, the shorthand is always the future. And so when you are getting clear on vision, and when it comes to building a leadership brand, the key difference between somebody who has a strong leadership brand and someone who doesn't is like the difference between someone who's a keynote speaker and someone who's a workshop speaker. So a keynote speaker has the ovaries to share the same core message in 8 different ways over the course of that talk. A workshop speaker will tell you 8 different things, right? That's the difference when you guys are going to conferences and you are looking at who's getting paid the big bucks, who's speaking on the TED stages, who is really being a true thought leader, pointing a future of the industry or of society or whatever. It's the people who have the courage to formulate a really bold core idea and share that in multiple different ways, right? Versus a workshop speaker who's going to teach you 8 different things. So I think this is helpful to keep in mind, that there are times when I see people where the opportunity is really asking them to show up as a keynote speaker. And I'm not just saying like on a keynote stage, like what the opportunity needed for you to do was to step into this high level of leadership, to paint a powerful and bold picture of the future, and to willingly own your place in it. But you chose to show up like a workshop speaker, and we've all done it, right? I'm going to share some funny experiences. We've all done this. But that is vision. And so when you think about vision, there's two things that I want you to think about. Number one is the big why. The big why. Like when I think about the big why for Safi Media, I think about doubling the number of women entrepreneurs who sustainably scale past 1 million. That's what our goal is to do, because we believe when women earn, we all win. I can remember when I was working with Annette Verschuren on her book, touring around Cape Breton. And what was so interesting is that we made like, I don't know, we were taking a little drive around. We must have made like 15 stops at like small artisan workshops to like the Verschuren Center to all over the place. And I just could see that here was a wealthy woman who was using her wealth, connections, and impact to enhance her community, to make sure that people who were incredibly talented had access not just to money, but to opportunities and connections. And as a person who's a former business journalist, what I noticed is that the women who were at the top of those, top 50 CEO lists and so on, they were practicing a level of generosity, a level of connection, a level of financial generosity, often a lot earlier. That's just my anecdotal experience, but I've certainly seen it. And I really believe that when women earn, we all win. So first thing, from a vision perspective, you want to think about your big why. And some of the questions that you want to ask yourself, question number one is, how will your company change the world? And secondly, can you allow yourself to own that possibility without having to be responsible for all of the details about how you're going to do it, which is, I think, why many women leaders won't necessarily step into owning the big possibilities to doing what Steve Jobs talks about, like making a dent in the universe or a ding in the universe, because we may be, and there's a broad brush here for sure, but we are sometimes conditioned to take so much responsibility. The first thing that we're thinking about is, I can't possibly own that massive future vision, because then I really have to be accountable to make it all happen. But that's not what, when we're really communicating a vision for the future, that's what we're doing. So how will your company change the world? And can you allow yourself to own that possibility? It's interesting. Last year at around this time, I was at a conference about big data and big data ecosystems. And the conference was put on by this organization called Crossbeam, which is a partner ecosystem platform. And there were a lot of keynote speakers there. He was a keynote speaker. He was a founder who has raised a ton of money, notably from Andreessen Horowitz's firm, and just, incredibly well connected in Silicon Valley. And when he spoke, he was clearly a CEO and founder who was speaking into the future of where the industry was going, where big data was going. It was a powerful, it was energizing. And then when you started having the workshop speakers come, they were talking about very detailed things, super valuable. But when you put them shoulder to shoulder, on the one hand, you saw someone who was truly willing to build a leadership brand by articulating not only where is the future for my company, but what is the future we are trying to create for all of you? And why does it matter? And why is it important? So I think this is kind of really key when it comes to building a leadership brand. I think the second part of this that we don't talk about enough is that very often that big why in and of itself may not be enough for you to be willing to do what it takes to have that level of visibility, maybe have that level of confidence in the moment, take that level of risk, et cetera. And so this is where I think things like gritty whys can come into play. So a gritty why is a little bit more, maybe you were underestimated. Maybe along your journey, there was, you encountered an investor who just wouldn't take a meeting, or they thought your idea sucked, or they gave you short shrift, or, blah, blah, lots of different things. And a lot of times I think we underestimate the power that these kinds of experiences can give us as fuel. So negative energy can be incredibly powerful. It's not just always something we need to process and release. It can actually be incredibly powerful to help us do hard things. I was interviewing a woman once named Jenny Radcliffe, who is the people hacker. And so in the sort of cybersecurity community, she's very, very well known internationally. Basically, like MI6 and the FBI, they hire her to kind of try to infiltrate their systems by like breaking their people, getting people to turn, finding security flaws and all of this. And she is like an expert negotiation trainer. She's brought into hostage situations. She really understands people's psychology. And one of the most fascinating things that she told me is that, you know, revenge is often a massive motivator in business. And I remember being like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But I thought about different times where I just needed an extra boost of something, or somebody pissed me off, or somebody might have underestimated me. And it was actually quite useful in terms of helping to propel in a moment, you know, where I might have taken an action that I may have otherwise felt too chicken to take. So when it comes to vision, we always think about your big why and your gritty why. Okay. And really being clear on those two things can help you. And so vision is all about the future. So I'm going to switch over to visibility. So it's great to have a really powerful vision, to understand the change that you want to see in the world, to understand how, when that change comes into being, how is it going to impact people's lives? Why is it meaningful? To really getting that fire in your belly, that willingness. Again, like I can remember talking to this guy named Purdy Crawford, who's sort of a Canadian legend in business. And we were talking about what makes a great leader. Like when you are looking for people who you are sort of, you know, handpicking to lead, or you are, you know, it's like trying to pick the quarterback in the NFL or that kind of thing. Like when you're picking great leaders, what are you looking for? And he said the most important thing that he looks for is fire in the belly, burning desire. Right? That's gritty why. And to have the big why, that big vision that pulls, to have that gritty why, that burning desire that pushes, and to be willing to allow people to see both of those things is really powerful. Like when you're in the presence of a leader who's willing to do that, it's really powerful. And I want you to be honest with yourself about how many times you don't show those things, because it might not seem very chill, or it seems kind of vulnerable, or you've been conditioned to tone it down or whatever. But these things really are powerful, you know, and they allow you to embody more of who you are. The biggest, I think, challenge so many leaders have, especially when you're in a minority or in the onlys, is all of the energy that it takes to not bring your true self to the work, because you're trying to fit in with a stereotype of what leadership is supposed to look like. And that's massively draining. And we wonder why so many women are dealing with epic levels of burnout and anxiety, which is a totally other topic, but then again, not really. So the next thing we'll talk about is visibility. So it's one thing to have these things. The second part is it's like the last part of what I said, you have to be willing to let those things be seen and to give them the space that they require. I don't know if any of you have seen people, maybe they're going up on stage or they're speaking in the middle of a meeting, and it's like they're apologizing before they begin. They're just trying to be, they're wanting to hurry their own selves along. So I think this thing about visibility is basically saying yes to taking up space and yes to being seen. And so where I wanted to take this is that it's hard, you know, it's hard to, I think, underestimate the kind of conditioning that so many of us have. And I think this is changing. But to pretend that this kind of conditioning doesn't exist, I think is, I think it's just, I strongly disagree. I would say that many women are conditioned from a young age to that it's not safe to be visible and to be seen. And an example of this would be like if you look at what happens to female candidates running for office would be one classic example of this. It's pretty vitriolic in politics, and I know some of you here are very close to that and understand that. So there are very real reasons that sometimes women can feel that if they are fully themselves, full out, if they speak if they speak their minds fully, that there could potentially be consequences for that. And there very often are, And so again, you're sort of caught between, do I show up fully expressed or do I not, and deal with the challenge of playing at 85%, when playing full out is actually a lot easier. So I want to share, I can remember sitting around a boardroom table once, and I was hearing this conversation and sort of vehemently disagreed with where the conversation was going. And I was kind of looking around, waiting for someone to say something, and no one was saying something because, like many board meetings, it was very restrained, as is, I'm sure you guys know that atmosphere. So I spoke out, and I decided to share my views on the situation, which were quite different. There was no sugarcoating. I was sort of incapable of doing that. But I can remember speaking out. I'm not sure if any of you can relate to this, but my heart was pounding. And I felt like I was both kind of proud of myself, but I was also halfway through what I was saying. And I'm trying to gauge the room. I'm wondering, am I the only person who feels this way? I felt unsafe. I felt in danger, even though I was surrounded by great people. But in speaking up, being one of the few women around that table, certainly the only woman of color around that table, and I'm speaking up, and I felt like danger. Like my whole nervous system was like, red alert, danger, red alert, danger. Again, even though there's like people around, but I mean, even though there were great people around, intellectually, I knew, hey, there's no reason that you should be feeling this. But nevertheless, I felt it. And this is a very common feeling, especially for many women who are going to be in situations where there's not a lot of other women around. And therefore, by nature of being who you are, you may be bringing a different way of looking at things. Just you being you, saying your piece, sharing your lived experience challenges a status quo, which can feel extremely threatening to you at that time, even though technically you're totally safe and you're fine. So I can remember all of this happening. What was interesting was that after the meeting, I found that what I said actually received a ton of support. But what was interesting to me is after that meeting, I found myself wanting to call the other people who were in that meeting to make sure it was all good, i.e., to seek approval after the fact for showing up and saying my piece. Right? This is even me who, like, this is a huge part of the work that I do, which is really understanding how power systems shape how women show up. I knew intellectually I was doing this, and I still felt like I had to get this approval because of how I'd really challenged the status quo. So I share this with you because I really think, back in the day, like in 2008, 2009, 2010, when Sheryl Sandberg wrote Lean In, it was at that time in the world of corporate feminism, the message was really, here are the rules to thriving in this system. And I don't blame that at all. I mean, I think this has been an evolution, but it's interesting, since books like Lean In have fallen more out of favor, it's because a lot of women have recognized that they in some ways enshrined continuing to uphold a system versus, hey, we have to really show up as who we are. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And we have to have our own backs, and we have to support other women around us. So this is visibility. So it's your willingness to be seen and to bring your unique point of view. And it's your ability to make yourself feel safe in that moment to actually do it with swagger, right? Like to do it. And so you might not always do it with swagger. God knows what I sounded like on that meeting, but it's really about yes. And so I want to share this, I think has been one of the most powerful strategies that I have learned to do this. And it's called the wholeness practice. So I've spoken a few times about how very often when we're showing up in environments that, to have that maybe they weren't necessarily built for us. They're great environments. There's no shade here, right? But when you're in an environment where maybe you're one of the few, or it's an environment where maybe you don't feel the most comfortable. So typically what happens is that there's a part of you that's feeling really uncomfortable, and you just kind of ignore that part and you soldier on. Right? Can you guys relate to this at all? Like you just kind of like, you know what? That's good. I'm feeling super uncomfortable, but whatever, I'm just going to soldier on. So this was like me in that meeting. I can feel it. My heart is pounding. I don't feel safe. What? Weird. Stop being such a weirdo and just keep saying your piece, right? So all of this is happening. And the problem, so we do that in the moment because you have to. The problem though, is if you never loop back to circle back to the part of you that felt that discomfort. And so what happens is that as you just continue, you face meeting after meeting, uncomfortable situation after uncomfortable situation. And God love you, you're like soldiering on, being brave. It's really awesome. And it's like you're developing what happens if you imagine doing like dumbbell curls. So this one version of yourself, who you are, is getting really strong. But in order to do that, she keeps suppressing this other version of you who feels really uncomfortable. And we might say you'll get over it, or that's just jitters or whatever. But what I have found is that that actually becomes quite unsustainable, and again, can lead to things like burnout. It can lead to things like anxiety. It just leads to all kinds of, because there's a ton of energy in not being able to bring your full self. So as an example, in that situation, in the boardroom situation I was just telling you about, I was like 40 at the time or something like that. My 40-year-old self understood I'm completely safe. My job is to raise sometimes unpopular opinions. I am here because I have a distinct point of view and an experience and skill set. And it is my duty to say this. But my inner sort of 12-year-old who was starting to uncover her voice, but was often admonished for pushing boundaries or for challenging people, especially challenging men, and getting in a lot of trouble for that kind of behavior. That was the part of me that in that moment felt terrified, right? So this sounds woo. It's not. This is the practice of wholeness and the ability to proactively circle back constantly to make sure all the versions of you are comfortable. You're making space for them. You're literally having conversations with yourself where you say, hey, little Eleanor, that was pretty intense, wasn't it? Well, you know what? It was intense. And I love having you with me in these experiences. I love your energy. I love your blah, 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 whatever. But what I want you to know is that it's not your responsibility to lead yourself around a boardroom table. I've got this, right? You're literally having these conversations with yourself. This is called a wholeness practice. And it is a very powerful practice for many people. I certainly teach it to all of my clients to really give you the sort of inner ecology required to withstand really challenging environments where maybe you feel like you don't belong. You have to make yourself like there's lots of work that can be done in the environment itself, but in that moment to function, you have to have your own back and have to have really good skills to make sure that you feel safe to be visible. Otherwise, you're supposed to do the stuff, but you will only ever allow one version of yourself to be visible. And that's typically the most perfect, polished, boring self. You know what I mean? It's one version, but it's not the real, right? It's not the fully embodied version of who you are. And so generation after generation, we keep bringing just one version of who we are, you know, and enshrining thereby what it means to be a really successful woman in business. So that's vision and visibility. And then the last thing that I'm going to share here is consistency. And so this is really quite tactical, but this is where, you know, I think it's important to be the best, to be really good, but it's also important to be loud. Like, it's also really important that we're consistent, that we're taking actions to build a leadership brand so that people do know who we are. So this is where, you know, I think about, this is super practical. So here, I think many really smart women would benefit from a much stronger sort of social strategy. How are you showing up on LinkedIn? Are you, and it's amazing the kinds of opportunities that get unleashed because you're willing to be present. So this is super tactical for many, and it depends, you know, it would depend on who I'm talking to, but I would suggest that for many of you, I would love to see you sharing content on a platform like LinkedIn, a minimum of 3 times a week. I would love to see you guys create content that establishes 3 different things. So 1, content that really establishes your expertise, your credibility. So for instance, if you are on a panel, if you are on a board of something, if you're, you know, new appointments, if you are speaking at an event, if you like whatever, that kind of thing really helps establish expertise and credibility. But another really underutilized thing, if we think about the future and we loop back to vision, another really thing that I think is really important is being willing to kind of share news and trends that are happening in your industry, but also to provide commentary on those things. So sometimes you'll see, you know, somebody sharing a news article and then they'll have like 1 or 2 lines. That's great, but that's like, you know, digging the well of your expertise with like a toothpick, I think, 1 or 2 lines at the top, right? What I would much rather see is you share it, but you have maybe, you know, a 2-minute video of yourself talking through the implications that this latest change and such will have for the future of your industry, for women entrepreneurs, for whatever it is that is your area. So giving yourself the space to do fuller in-depth commentary is a great way to establish expertise in, you know, in an industry and in a space. So really noticing the way, like, are you putting Spanx on your commentary when you share it on LinkedIn? As an example, right? Like all the ways in which we're being smaller. So that's kind of one thing that I think establishing expertise. The other thing I think is really huge, and I call these hand raisers, like how can you use your social content to create really epic conversations for yourself? So for instance, if I were sharing something like I just did, like that expertise, I would actively be asking, and a great thing to ask is if you've just given commentary, especially if you've given fiery commentary, I will normally ask things like, what do you, you know, over to you, do you agree or disagree? What did I get wrong here? And so what you're doing is asking people to comment, and then that can often be great opportunities to start engaging in dialogue and leveraging those kinds of comments and the people who are checking out that kind of content to start to really build key relationships for yourself in your field. You know, so that's what I would consider to be a hand raiser. Really looking like, how are you leveraging, you know, for this crowd, it's probably going to be LinkedIn, to open doors, to open, you know, conversations, to build your network strategically. And we do that through looking for engagement and requiring it, you know? So I think that's kind of another piece. And then the final piece here is backstory. And so this is people consistently will be like, this is so weird. I posted this thing about, this marathon that I did, or, I just finished this triathlon and I posted it, or, wherever we are sharing more of our backstory and of who we are. So really allowing ourselves to show up as a full person, that is really powerful in terms of building a 3-dimensional brand, having people feel like they know us, standing out as somebody who is memorable, and being able to have that power of recall. When people think about an X, Y, or Z, they're thinking about you. Like, this kind of thing is really key. So that's sort of like the backstory. So that's kind of the piece around consistency. I would love for everybody here to not just be the best at what you do, or, to be great at what you do, but not to underestimate the power of being loud, of being visible and out there. And sometimes, again, we think, oh, if I have really high visibility, am I diminishing my brand? Not at all. People don't care enough to know how often you're visible. I think it just is an opportunity for founders to really unlock opportunities for themselves. So to kind of bring it together, I would say that, when I think about building a strong leadership brand, I think about the more women that we have who show up fully expressed. And by that, I mean, we are saying to the part of ourselves that are only open to sharing who we are when we're perfect, in perfect control, all of this, that we're actually willing to show up fully expressed, fully embodied, and bringing all of who we are. I think that is how we actually, yes, unlock a ton of opportunities for ourselves and our future, but also we actually, we embody the change that we want to see. And we embody what leadership looks like and what power looks like, in all kinds of different hands, and so that's really my goal, that I've given you a couple of different ways and tools to think about building a strong leadership presence, and a couple of different tools to be able to actually do that. So that's what I've got. Thank you for listening. I hope it was useful. I'm curious what I'd love for you guys to share in the comments what you found to be, the most insightful or the most useful, or something that you're taking away from today. I'd love to hear it.
Eleanor, yes, that was, yes, just so many great pieces of advice and wisdom. And I talked a lot, so I'll let others, if anyone has questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Anything at all. You've given us lots to think about, Eleanor. It's great.
Hey, Eleanor, Lynn here.
Hey.
I think you mentioned this, but I wanted to go back to your story about speaking up in the boardroom and around the boardroom table. I'm curious as to whether or not anyone supported you right then and there in the moment, verbally, and who that was.
Yes, somebody did, and it was a white guy. It was like all white guys around the table. Somebody did. Yeah, somebody did. But there was a lot of quietness.
That's just it. I mean, there's so often when you speak up, and it just you feel like it lands with a thud. And
that's how I felt.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, do they actually hear me? Do I need to repeat myself here? Or was it just so well articulated that they're all stunned?
Yeah.
and have nothing to say as a result?
Yeah.
I sometimes like to think it's the second.
Yeah. I think so.
She hurt her ankle?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh, here, just hang on. You might need to
ankles take time.
Mute some folks. There we go. Yeah, I'm so curious. Emily, I'm sure you had a take on this.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I was the only at a boardroom table so many times, so you could feel like your heart pounding and my cheeks getting red and all of that. But I used to tell myself a different narrative about it, which was they got to think about this. Like I just blew their minds, and that's why they're quiet. And that really helped me just keep talking essentially, and not like shut myself up or cut myself off too quickly. So yeah, that's definitely how I really managed those moments, was being like, yeah, they got to think about this because I just blew their minds in a good way.
Because they've never heard it before, right? So
exactly. They had not thought about it. And I just dropped like something huge for them. My question for you, Eleanor, is you talked about the difference between the workshop leader who shares 8 different tactical things to do and a visionary thought leader topic.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about like the transition from being the workshop leader and showing up that way. How do you distill it down to like, okay, that's the one big thing? Is it like leaning on your vision and sharing like one truth about it? Like, how do you get to that one big idea?
Yeah. And to be honest, like, I think we have to show up a little bit as both, like quite practically speak, you know, there's, I think it's about really though, understanding like in what moments am I going to show up like this way? Right. And in that and pointing the way, like that top level visionary leader, and giving that space and giving myself the permission to show up that way. So I think I really think we do show up as both. What I find the most consistently reliable way to do this is to really think about, so it's always going to be connected to your why. And that why is all, you know, what I would love to see is when it's expressed as a concrete vision for the future. So something very concrete that you want to sort of change. So I guess that's more mission based. So for instance, I might say, and I'm using my own examples because I know these the best. So I might say, my vision is to advance a model of economic growth that nourishes the planet one woman-owned business at a time. And so that's like, you know, that is a vision. The mission is like, the proof point is to double the number of women entrepreneurs who sustainably scale to $1 million+ in revenue, because when women earn, we all win. And so it's very, you know, and so I think that like that is big enough that it does a couple of things. Number one, sorry, I just have to. I might have COVID. I'm not sure.
Oh, no. My husband has COVID right now, so I know it's like a thing going around.
Test, exactly.
It is still a thing. Yeah.
So
big time.
But I think that, you know, I think it's important for leaders in a couple of different reasons. Practically speaking, is your vision big enough to contain the vision of your team? You know what I mean? Is your vision, and for women, like evolving and changing. Like, I don't know if you guys ever notice how for so many of the women around you, as the older we get, the faster we evolve and change, the more interested and intrigued we become about growth and what's possible and who we are. It's a very, very interesting milestone of women's development that sometimes men don't share as much. And there's a lot of cultural, you know, reasons around that and so on. But when you allow that big vision, what it also allows, it recognizes our own pace of change so that we're not changing it. You know what I mean? So when we share that large vision, often that holds true for years. Many of you have had your vision for years, and how that you're fulfilling it keeps changing and evolving as you evolve. But, you know, so I think that allows, and I think it also allows, if you're working in an organization, it allows you to be able to make moves and stay true to where you're going, you know, and stay true. It allows people to see, does this person fit? And it's like, does this vision align, you know? And then for entrepreneurs, it allows for our iterations while we're kind of pursuing that larger vision. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. I'm thinking about like the philosophy map and how that I'm getting kind of, that's how I can distill it down. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or shares or comments or anything that anybody wants to add to the discussion that I may have missed or that you think would be a good compliment? Hello.
Hi. So, I'm at the kind of stage now where, yeah, I recognize how fast everything is moving as we get older. I can see myself changing
Yeah.
a lot more as that kind of goes through. Right now, I'm finding myself, I'm leading this panel at a big conference in a month's time down in the States,
Mm-hmm.
which is my next
Oh, cool.
market.
Nice.
Right. So it was, kind of planned that way. But holy Moses, there is so much going on down in the States when you talk about education and who they're promoting and who they're not promoting and why they're not promoting them, and the whole, kind of debate about you just let the smartest people in. You can't be, there's like so much going on. And the more I talk to the people that I kind of put together on my panel, more I realize, how deep this particular area is. And I just feeling like just yesterday and today, it felt like, oh God, are you out of your depth here, or you just play the role of the great moderator and make sure that these three great women have fantastic things to say, regardless of what they are. I'm just feeling quite unnerved, at this point where normally most of the people in this room would stand up and moderate a panel probably easily.
Yeah.
And it's because I want to make a big showing that I offered to do this panel. I was the one who suggested the topic and said, I think this would be great, right? There's the nexus between venture capital and women and the unconscious biases and, the whole entrepreneurship centers where there's a lot of tech women around. I proposed it. And now I'm feeling like really, really.
Are you worried it's going to be like too fiery or like really controversial or, like clashing opinions? What's the concern?
Yeah, my concern is that I'm not, kind of right where they are,
right
in the midst of all of this. And so, I think I'm doing the right things. I said, listen, I think we should have several meetings before this panel takes place. We just don't want it to be winging it. We want to have a nice plan, and everybody agreed, blah, blah, those kinds of things. I just think I'm just, just coincidence that this masterclass is taking place right at the time where I'm starting to feel like I'm shriveling under all these new, real big political concerns and so on that we don't have to deal with in Canada at all.
Yeah.
Major issues in the educational system about who gets, special treatment and who doesn't, and why, and things that I don't know, I wouldn't normally be equipped to deal with. So I really appreciate, everything that I'm hearing today. And you're talking about, kind of the age thing. And so,
oh, I love this so much. I'm going to share, and sometimes that I want to share a couple of things I think with a group, and some of these may apply, and some of them they may be less applicable. But I'm just trying to see. Okay, this is really funny. So I remember a while ago, I was having lunch with two super high-powered women CEOs from Halifax. And we were having lunch together. We'd been wanting to have lunch together for some time. And then rolling into the conversation, we started talking about the psychic that they both went to. It was really funny. It was really hilarious because it was, here are my goddess and angel cards. So it's the reason I'm sharing this is because sometimes you start to talk to, and we have these really cool things that we do that just kind of help us embody in different ways. So you're like, look, I'm stepping into a charged environment where the conversation we are going to be having could go in a number of different directions because it's a charged environment, because there's a lot of relevant, newsworthy topics on the table that deeply impact people's lives, and because I'm moderating a discussion between 3 firebrands. And so in those kinds of environments, when we can meet them in different ways. And so sometimes if we're feeling we are in the midst of transformation ourselves, and so there's like the former version, and the hard thing about being in transformation yourself, it's a liminal space. You're not what you were, and you're not quite at this next iteration. So it feels deeply uncomfortable. And I've been in this so many times, where you're not quite yourself. You don't quite have the juice you had when you were in your former version of yourself. But you outgrew that, and you're not quite in your next version. And so you don't have your full juice there. So you feel half juiced, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but I've definitely been here. So, and then you go in half juiced into this fiery situation. And you're like, okay, how do I show up? And so what I hear happening a little bit, and I've certainly can relate to this, is I'm going to do all this prep to try my best to make sure that I kind of control the fire. And I think actually, of course, prep is important, and we want, prep around that. So I'm not saying that's not helpful. But one thing that I find can be extremely helpful is always to meet fire with your own brand of fire. And so the reason that I'm going through these cards is I remember this has come up a couple of times about how important it is if you're trying to, it's not fake it till you make it. It's if you're trying to show up to embody something ahead of time. You know what I mean? So it might be like, I'm not yet at this place where I feel this fiery version of myself to be able to really handle this. I've been there. I can see I'm going to be there. So I'm trying to embody this level of power ahead of time. Do you guys know what I'm trying? Am I being clear? Is this right? Yeah. So when that happens, what's really helpful is to see examples of it. So some of you, there are people in your network who show up with this level of power that is very helpful to you in that moment. And you're just like, I just needed to spend a little bit of time with this person, and it helped restore some of this mojo that I want to bring, or it helped show me a different way to model this. Another thing that I find is very useful is, again, you're like, are we really having this on our? Yes, we are. So this is very cool. It's called Guidance Cards from Doreen Virtue. But really what we're looking at here is how has feminine power been expressed through the ages and in different cultures? That's what we're looking at when we're looking at, that's why it's so very interesting, right? So in Christian Judeo-Christian, we have like Mary. You know what I mean? Like we have a few limited versions of how feminine power has been, of what that looks like. So I find these goddess cards extremely interesting. And the 2 that I'm trying to pull out are this one, Kali, who is a Hindu goddess of endings and beginnings. So Kali is often depicted with a sword. So she's kind of the goddess of creative destruction, right? Which essentially is what you're going through when you're going through transformation. And Kali has power. She has wrath. She terrifies people, but she also signals the new dawn, right? So this is a very powerful, it's just, you will find it immeasurably helpful to kind of think through, oh, that's so interesting. How is she depicted? This is a different way of looking at transformation. And because women continue to transform, and it's part of our milestones in our development, having access to this, because often when we think about feminine power, it's only ever really shown in one way, which would be more like the Lakshmi goddess, like prosperity, gentleness, abundance. Kali is like creative destruction. So that's one really powerful goddess. And then the other one that I'm thinking for you, it could be super useful, is the goddess Ishel. She is an Aztec goddess, Ixchel. And the reason that she's interesting is because she, she's kind of like a medicine woman is another way that she shows up, but also like she's associated with the moon. But what she is best known for is clarity, the healing, centering power of clarity. So when I am going into those kinds of situations where you don't have control, potentially lots of fiery, like how do you center yourself and how do you envision how you're going to show up? I think Callie and Ishel are really powerful ways to think about how to model feminine power in those moments. Right? So I hope this is useful to you. It's probably not what you thought we were going to talk about, but it's, I told you that 2008 called, they wanted their leadership branding tips. We gave them back and we showed up with our 2023 version. So yeah, I hope it's useful to you. It's just a different way of thinking, right? And it's just such a relief. Oh yeah, I don't have to invent it. There's models out there that help me think through how I want to show up. And that's how I'm going to show up. I'm going to meet this level of fire with my own level of fire. I don't need to control it. I just need to direct it, and practically speaking, you are such a master in this area. A lot of times directing is simply offering interesting piece of insight. What do you think, Tara? That you are directing the fire. That's it. Directing and adding. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have responsibility for what they do.
Thank you. I really like that notion of like planning how you're going to show up.
Yeah.
Planning how you're going to show up and the different ways that you can show up, but just to make the plan in advance.
Yes.
And know what version of, Callie or Ishel or, how we're going to do this and then take that forward and just work with it from there and allow yourself to be who you plan to be on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I know we're at time, but it's like, there's this, I remember hearing that the Inuit people have like 20 different words for snow, and when it comes to women in power, our language is often very limited because of what the models that we've had for what it looks like. It looks this way. And when we show up, it has to look this way. That I think a lot of times, like just increasing our vocabulary for what power looks like and giving ourselves permission to show up and experiment with different ways to show up powerfully to uncover, I think that it's like, it's a vocabulary, like an embodied vocabulary that I think can be so helpful for us. And it's super fun to do it too.
It all connects back to the swagger.
Yes.
That was such a refreshing take on this topic, Eleanor. And honestly, I've written down so much. So it'll be fun to go back and look at these notes and reflect back and share some of this. But listen, so appreciative of your time today and your insights and just such an honest and frank conversation about this and sharing some personal experiences. And I think understanding this audience, who you have before you too, based on a incredible level of engagement, obviously really resonated and appreciate everybody participating and asking questions and taking the opportunity to get some insights from Eleanor. So we will conclude, but I will say on October 3rd at 4 p.m. we're going to do Exporting 101 with the Forum for International Trade Training, and that's sponsored by EDC. So join us for that if you're interested in learning on this topic, or on that topic, I should say. And then we will, as said, we'll post the recording because certainly worth going back and rewatching this. There's a lot covered and shared in the session, and really grateful, Eleanor. And
it was so fun. Such a fantastic group of people too. It just felt like a great conversation.
yeah, no, it was indeed. So thank you all, and take care, everybody. Stay safe, and hopefully we don't have too much crazy weather coming up.